All right, so we're recording. Hi everyone. Thank you for joining us today to hear more about the apprenticeship system in Australia. My name is Catherine Zinemorowski, and I am one of the research analysts at the Schaefer Center for Public Policy at the University of Baltimore. We're really excited to have three experts with us today who are going to share their insights and experiences on the apprenticeship, how the apprenticeship system works in Australia. Before we dive into their presentations, I'm first going to ask that our presenters briefly introduce themselves, and then I'll have each of the commission members, also the two that have who are here with us, provide a brief introduction. So, Gary, if you want to go ahead.
Thanks, Catherine. My name's Gary Workman. I'm the Executive Director of the Apprenticeship Employment Network and the Global Apprenticeship Network in Australia. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you. Andrew, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. Hello, everybody. Andrew Sessanov, Group General Manager, WPC Group, based in Australia. Spent about 25 years working on the employer side of apprentice intermediaries and the employment of apprentices in workplaces. So thanks for having me.
And Nick?
Nicholas Wyman, President of IWSI America. I work between Australia and the US with Andrew and Gary on varying activities in and around sharing the good word about the Australian apprenticeship model. Nice to see you this morning.
Thank you. And then Senator Rosapap, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Maryland State Senator Jim Rosapap, a member of the Apprenticeship 2030 Commission and chair of the work group on public sector tools to promote apprenticeships. And Nick, it's good to see you again.
Natalie,
thanks for having us. Yeah, great to see you.
Natalie, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, hello. I'm Natalie Wisnowski. I'm the new Legislative Director in Senator Hester's office.
Thank you. And go ahead, Avanette.
Hi, I'm Avanette Blanding. I'm one of the commission members. I'm a CFO at an engineering company in Baltimore, Maryland.
And Jasmine.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jasmine Jardot. I'm here alongside Catherine with the Schaefer Center at the University of Baltimore.
Great. Thanks, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started with presentations. I don't know if one of you wants to go first. We have Nick first on the agenda, but if you guys have worked out something else, feel free.
I thought it might be really good context. If that's all right, I'll flip around. I'll go last. I thought it'd be great if Gary starts, then Andrew might give us some examples of what Gary's talking about, some programs in action, and then I'll round it out. Gary, over to you.
All right, sounds good. I did put a few slides together. So again, we're happy. We've got a small group, so if people have got questions along the way, happy to sort of take them as we go, and happy to give you the slides if you need them down the track. I think Andrew and Nick have already got them, but just to sort of, I think people can see that first slide there. I'll skip straight to the first one. Oops. Is that working? It was working before. All right. Can everyone see that okay? It looks like it's working.
Yep, looks good.
All right. Just to give you a bit of context in the Australian system. So at a very high level, Australia's had a fairly consistent framework for our apprenticeship systems now for about 50 years. Australia's sort of broken up into 7 different states. This is where it starts to get a little bit complicated from our perspective. So even though it's a national system, the responsibilities seems to be more at a state level. So you can get variations from state to state, which I'm sure you guys can appreciate coming from an America where there's 50 odd states there. We talk about apprenticeships and traineeships, but from a government perspective, they really mean the same thing. It's just covering different types of industries. Our apprenticeship system really covers the traditional trades that everyone would be used to: plumbing, electrical, carpentry, automotive, and so on. Whereas traineeships probably started in the mid-90s, really cover some of the new areas like business administration, IT, health, and so on. So it's really the duration that determines whether it's an apprenticeship or a traineeship, and then the funding that's attached to it. Most of our vet qualifications are set up with our training organisations, and they can basically be either a student, so you're a full-time student, or you can do it as an apprenticeship or traineeship where you're doing on-the-job training and off-the-job training. So you're actually employed through the apprenticeship system. Couple of notes I've just had there. Our apprenticeship system, our commencements and completion rates have been steadily in decline over a number of years, and we think, there's systems that can be done better in Australia to improve that, but we certainly have more and more of our young people going through a university pathway than they do going to apprenticeships. If we compare that to sort of 30, 40 years ago, it's a similar problem that a lot of developed countries are seeing, where there's more of a perceived value in young people going to university, but it's certainly not the case in reality, but that's certainly what people's perceptions are. And look, I guess most of our reviews, we tend to have a lot of reviews in Australia. The government's at a state level and a federal level. Every time there's a new government, there's a new review into the apprenticeship system. They tinker with a lot of the implementation around the edges of the system, but in terms of the overall framework and the way it's set up, those things haven't really changed in Australia for a long time. The slide you can see there sort of gives you a bit of an indication on the numbers. Again, we're a fairly small population when we're comparing ourselves to the US. In Victoria, where I'm from, we've got about 36,000 new apprentices every year, so the numbers aren't massive. And again, it's around about 15% of our youth go through an apprenticeship pathway or a vet pathway compared to university, where about 65% of our youth go that way. When I have a look at the next slide, I've just tried and give you a bit of the, I guess, the high-level organisations that are working within in Australia, and some of the terminology that we use here. So we've got skills ministers in each state. They report and meet with the federal minister. They have a ministerial council, and they try and have a set of national agreed standards that they work to and priorities that they work to. You'll see in Australia, all of the states and federal ministers signed a national skills plan for the first time in about 10 years recently. And they've also agreed to work towards some common, consistent priorities for the first time in about 10 years in Australia. Our federal government at the moment is called DEWA, the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations. This is important because it's moved back, apprenticeships have moved back into the employment portfolio. Sometimes they sit in the education portfolio, so we have different priorities depending on where apprenticeships sit at a federal level. And then we have state training authorities in each state and jurisdiction that sort of are responsible for the implementation of those programs and the data collection and reporting back and so on. From a regulatory perspective, we also have the Australian Skills Authority, and then we've got regulators in some states to make sure that we haven't got any dodgy providers out there, making sure that the qualifications are being delivered the way that they should, and then that the funding is sort of being making sure that the funding's sort of being used the way it should as well. Then when we have workplace relations, in Victoria, we've got 7 different regulators for apprentices covering workplace safety, making sure that they've got fair pay and conditions and those sorts of things. So it can become quite complex by the time you add in all the regulators at a state and federal level. And recently we've added jobs and skills councils. So they're national organisations, and they've been grouped into like-minded industries. So all the construction sectors are together in one Jobs and Skills Council, and they're responsible for understanding their workforce needs for the future, understanding if the training delivery products are suitable and if they need to be updated, They're responsible for making sure that they promote their industries well and they attract enough young people to meet their workforce needs into the future, and updating and maintaining the units of competencies in the training packages. So they're relatively new organisations in Australia. They've been sort of trialled over the last 4 or 5 years in some sectors, but now each industry is attached to a Jobs and Skills Council, and going forward at a national level, they're going to be responsible for making sure that they're training for the needs of their industry sectors. When we have a look at the implementation, we have training organisations. In Australia, they're called registered training organisations, or RTOs. They would be similar to your community colleges and other organisations that may be for profit. We've got a mixture of government-owned and private providers in this space. Most of the funding goes to the government-owned TAFEs, but we also have some really high quality industry and community-based not-for-profit providers. We also have some secondary schools or high schools that get into this space, and they offer some vetting school programs or vocational programs for some areas. Then we've obviously got the students, whether they're called students or apprentices or trainees, depends on which state you're in, what funding they get and how they're actually delivered. And then we also have organisations called, they've just changed their name recently, but Australian Apprenticeship Support Network. These are organisations that are there to be the interconnection between the employers and the training organisations, and supporting the young people to make sure that they are getting into the right training program. The employers have the right support mechanisms to make sure that they can get through to a successful completion, and making sure that all the paperwork's done and the government are getting all the data and the transfer of funding and all those sorts of things are happening correctly. Then when we have a look at the employment, we obviously got employers who employ directly. So they'll look for young people, they'll do their own recruitment, they'll employ them as an apprentice or trainee. They provide the on and the off the job training, they pay the wages, the entitlements, and then they support the apprentice through to completion, and they'll go to a training organisation for the off the job training. And then we have a fairly unique part of the model, which a lot of countries are showing interest in, and that's the group training organisations. And Nick and Andrew will talk more a little bit about that today. But that's what I represent from an Australian perspective. We've got members in Victoria that are GTOs. They've been around for about 40 years. The GTOs are the direct employers of the apprentices, but they place them with host employers to undertake the on-the-job training. The GTO is responsible for making sure that the apprentice is trained correctly, paid correctly, is in a safe working environment, and they may rotate the young person through multiple host employers over the life of the apprenticeship, to make sure they get a well-rounded experience, they get well-rounded qualifications. They may also rotate them because it wasn't a great match with the host employer, or the host employer's run out of work, or there was just a poor match, or there was some safety issues, or a whole range of other issues for reasons why a GTO may rotate someone through to another host employer. If we have a look at the framework overall, this is at a fairly high level. We have the Australian Qualifications Framework, and this is the part that really hasn't changed in Australia for a long time. If we look at the lower levels, certificate level 1, 2, and 3 make up the apprenticeships. So most apprentices, when they're fully qualified, will come out with a certificate 3 level qualification. And then we've got certificate 4s, which is sort of post-apprenticeship quals. And then we're moving into the higher apprenticeship or higher education spaces when we've got diplomas at levels 5 and 6. A bachelor degree is really the start of the university qualification at level 7. And then we're going into masters and doctorates at levels sort of 9 and 10. We are starting to see a few apprenticeships being trialled at that diploma and advanced diploma levels, at levels 5 and 6. In Australia, we call them higher apprenticeships or degree apprenticeships. We're starting to see some industries move into that space, but it is a little bit more complicated in Australia because of the workplace relations and what do you pay someone at that level. We're still working through what that looks like because a lot of our industrial relations awards haven't been modified to take on an apprentice at those levels. That's really set for an apprentice at an earlier level at Certificate 3. So from there, look, we're getting into a fair bit of detail, but most of our vet qualifications that are now managed by the Jobs and Skills Councils, which are industry owned and operated, they're responsible for the training package that makes up the qualification at that particular qualification level. The training package is made up of units of competencies. The units of competencies have assessment requirements. Most training packages are made up of somewhere between 15 and 30 units of competency. So most of the training for a traditional apprenticeship will take around about 4 years, and it's made up of around about 1,500 hours of training, which is a combination of on and off the job. But all of the assessment is usually done off the job. We would like more of the assessment done in the workplace, and that'll be something that Andrew and Nick will probably talk to. But the system is really designed to be a competency base, so a young person can repeat that activity in a work environment. It's seen to be a work activity, and then they are assessed, or they can do that activity multiple times in the workplace in multiple situations and environments, hopefully building their knowledge over time, and then they can be assessed at a training organisation when it needs to. These are some of the areas that the Australian system could be a little bit stronger and better. We have a lot of inconsistencies when it comes to delivery of training. We have some really good providers, we have some poor providers, and noting that we only have around about 50% of our young people finish their qualification is some of the areas that we need to look at improvement from an Australian perspective. I'll keep going through some of these slides, but again, happy to take questions at any point. When we have a look at the Australian apprenticeships, the apprenticeships normally in a traditional trade will go for 3 to 4 years in the construction sector, energy sector, mining sectors. Traineeships, as we mentioned before, usually 1 to 2 years full-time, usually in areas like business, admin, retail, professional care services, IT, and they can range in qualifications up to the advanced diploma. I know I've got a fair bit of information on those slides and I'm going through them fairly quickly. We have some other modes of apprenticeships. We have school-based apprenticeships where young people in their secondary school or high school can start their apprenticeship in their later years. This can be in the last couple of years of their high school. They might do their on-the-job training with an employer 1 day a week or 2 days a week, depending on the employer and the industry. But they can typically get through a school-based apprenticeship by the time they're sort of 18 or 19. We also have things like pre-apprenticeships, which is a shorter program, normally 10 to 13 weeks in duration. It's to give people qualifications at that certificate 1 or 2 level, giving them enough information and hands-on skills that an employer is then suitably impressed to take them on full-time, so then they can start their apprenticeship after that. And as I mentioned before, we've got higher or degree apprenticeships, which is something relatively new in Australia, where we're just starting to get diploma and advanced diploma level qualifications into some of the areas like IT, some in the engineering sectors, where we're getting some interest from employers where they want some more advanced skills. when we have a look at the I guess the total number of apprentices we have in Australia and their progress and how we're actually performing as a country, you'll see the numbers do fluctuate a little bit over time. They come and go depending on government programs and incentives. We have quite a number of qualifications, too many qualifications, a lot of people would say. We have a lot of people in the training system, about almost 400,000 people, but a smaller proportion of them are doing apprenticeships and traineeships. We have a completion rate of around about 55%, where GTOs have a much higher completion rate. And we have a fairly good success rate in people entering the workforce full-time once they complete their apprenticeship. It's around about 95% of people that complete their apprenticeship or training in this space are employed full-time once they complete. So the results are good for those that get through to the end. And some of the more popular qualifications we have in this space, so carpentry, electrical, business administration, light vehicle mechanic, early childhood education, hospitality, retail, plumbing, engineering and hairdressing make up the top 10. I'm happy to stop there at that point. Andrew, Nick, I'm happy for you to, if you think I've missed something. There's a lot of things that we could talk about the system and the structure and how it's all set up for hours. It's fairly complicated for a new organisation, someone with different terminology to come in and get a real strong grasp of the system.
Sure, no, I think that was great, Gary, and we could lead into well, one thing I did want to just an observation. It's interesting in the US how the word Gary, vocational, has connotations, you know. So it's Australian in Australia, the UK, vet or vocational is widely accepted, whereas in the US, the word does, you know, have connotations to lower skilled or more manual work. But so what we might do, Gary, is we might get Andrew to now.
Nick, can I ask a couple of questions first?
Sure, Jim. Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of great information, very helpful, a lot of stuff I didn't know, so I really appreciate it. It seemed like on that chart, just glancing at it, that a very large number of your apprentices are, I guess, 15 to 19 years old. Is that correct?
There are a lot in vocational studies at that age, but our apprentices are getting older. The average age of the apprentice now is about 23, and female apprentices, it's even higher than that. Yep. What we're finding, Jim, is a lot of young people will finish high school and then they'll stumble around university or a bit of work for a couple of years, and then they'll come back to the apprenticeship system a little bit older.
So Jim, we don't make like in the US, there's sometimes, you know, some people say, oh, there's youth apprenticeship and this apprenticeship. For us, it's all just apprenticeship. The only difference would be if you start your apprenticeship in school, as Gary said, and there's that terminology with some of those more business IT apprenticeships, which they call traineeships, which sort of means something different again in the US. But I think it was, Gary, it was more, it's like about a couple of years ago, at least, it was like close to 50% were over 20 or 23 years of age or 24 years of age. So it's not just, you know, something for young people. It's the Australian high secondary education system really does, you know, desire, not through compulsion, but does like people to finish high school and then move into apprenticeships. Whereas if you went back a few decades, it was quite common that people, high school juniors, would be just leaving, getting into an apprenticeship before they completed high school. But that's becoming less common now.
That's the reason I want to push it, because in Maryland, we had this strategy very much focused on high school level apprenticeships. So I'm just trying to understand, if you got 387,825 people in an apprenticeship, right, in March of 2023, that's the macro number?
They're the total numbers in training at that time, correct? Yep.
Okay, so what percentage of those would be 16 or 17 years old? Any idea?
Oh, less than 10%. Yeah, yep.
I'd say yes.
But the
Maybe
system's
even, yeah.
designed for 15 to 19-year-olds, and the pay and structure is designed for young people, but we're finding them now in their early 20s before they start, the vast majority. Yeah.
I understand, but again, just because this is a big focus of ours. So the ones that are 16 and 17-year-old, do you have compulsory attendance to 16 or 18 or what?
To 16, the government are really trying to get young people through to finish high school, which is most young people would be 18 at that stage, but the compulsory attendance is to 16.
It changes. It changes by some states, right, Gary? It's a state thing, or is it a federal thing?
No, it changes by state. You're right, Nick. And we find our most disadvantaged areas and cohorts, they're the ones leaving school earlier as well.
So Jim, the most common thing would be that people are doing both. They're starting an apprenticeship in these schools that are specialising in apprenticeship that Gary mentioned before. So they have this thing, VES. It does sound like it sounds like something to do with animals, but it's not. Veterinary, no. VET, VET. So vocational apprenticeship starting in schools. And the school-based programs, there's a couple of companies that have done this for many years very successfully. It really is a try before you buy, and you do get students who, you know, if compulsion says you have to stay at school, it tends to not work so well. So offering for students who like to use their head and hands, as they say, that they can still continue on with their schooling, but a couple of days a week, if I'm right, Gary, they actually get to go to a workplace, and that counts as credits towards
Gotcha.
complete. So it's like a stackable credential, as they say.
Gotcha. I got one last question, then I'll shut up. So what occupations are the 16 and 17-year-olds predominantly in? Is there a pattern, or is it random distribution?
This is an area where we need to do a lot better in Australia. We have a lot of our young people doing things like sport and fitness or hospitality, but they don't lead to jobs when they finish their secondary school. We would like them to do more traditional trades.
Gotcha. That's not that dissimilar here. So that's very interesting. Thank you.
And then there's always, Jim, it's a global thing. You know, those our friends in insurance make it pretty hard in Australia. Like Australia's so that sometimes does limit the workplace based. And
what you're talking about, workers' comp? Workers' compensation?
Yes, being able to insure somebody under the age of 18 in a lot of industries is actually quite challenging.
Well, just FYI, since you're dealing in the United States too, this is an issue that we've discussed in the commission, and we've had extensive discussions with our state insurance commissioner about, who says employers who believe that they will be penalized for hiring 16 and 17-year-olds don't understand the business. Because in the United States, the national standards are your workers' comp rates are only driven by the record of your company in terms of workers' comp claims and your number of employees. Age is not a factor in workers' comp rating in the United States.
Interesting. And it also could open up to discrimination, reverse discrimination claims, potentially, you know. So when you say age discrimination, people always think of older workers, but potentially
absolutely
could be an issue for younger workers.
Well, that we actually looked into too. I can give you the short version of that, and then we will get back to Australia. Is we were getting a lot of people saying we won't hire anybody under 18. And so we checked with our state attorney general, and the state attorney general's office said, well, that's true. There's no federal law against age discrimination against young people, only against people over 40. But Maryland state anti-discrimination law covers people of any age. As long as you're legally able to work, which most 16-year-olds are, they cannot discriminate against you because of your age.
Good.
Just FYI.
Then it looks like we have a hand raised.
Yes, hi, this is Donna Edwards, and thank you for this presentation. I have a couple questions. Would you explain the difference between apprenticeship and trainership? Because I see that it'll say apprentices and trainees, or apprenticeships and trainerships. What is the
Yeah.
difference? What do you consider
I'll
one
give
versus the
I'll
other?
give my translated version, Gary, and then you might help me. So, in Australia, there was huge public utility infrastructure employers. So, all the roads works and electricity and everything was government owned, and that was one of the largest group of employers in Australia. And probably 20 years ago in a lot of states, that was privatized, sold off by government. But they were always seen as, with building and construction, a bit like in the US, they were seen as the traditional apprenticeships. And there was definitely certain groups who, much like the unions in the US, said, well, hang on, how can you be doing these shorter term apprenticeships that are only 12 to 18 months in duration? And so the traineeship word really is generally focused on the apprenticeships that definitely don't require like certification like an electrician, right, Gary? It tends to be more, when I say a license. So you can't become an electrician in Australia without completing certain training. It's a licensed occupation. But the traineeships are always shorter in duration, but it all comes under this umbrella called Australian apprenticeship. And to be honest with you, Donna, it does confuse people here. It does confuse employers. That, we're trying to say keep it simple. Apprenticeship isn't apprenticeship. So you'll often find that the traineeships are more like IT, cybersecurity, business administration. How would you anything else to add to that, Gary?
Yeah, no, look, I think you've got it spot on. Sometimes you might call it blue collar and white collar work. So blue collar, the traditional trades, construction trades mainly are apprenticeships. They go for about 4 years. And the white collar paraprofessional industries, they're all traineeships and a lot shorter.
But just a little bit. Sorry, John, okay. A little bit of context on Australia. Unfortunately, my homeland, we don't really make anything. We dig it up. We're just a big mining site. We dig it up, sell it to China, and then they sell it back as products. So we don't actually. There's nowhere near. We don't make any vehicles in Australia anymore. We used to make. So there's not. So manufacturing or anything in industry manufacturing type apprenticeships. There are some sheet metal, and Andrew's about to talk about ExxonMobil, whom you all know. Which might be, a good segue in a minute. But Donna, yeah, please.
Well, yeah, what I'm trying to do, I mean, if we're going to be considering, apples to apples or oranges and apples and grapes here. So in these trainerships, are they still like a formal apprenticeship where you have one senior person with one under person learning the job? Or are they more like somebody
it's exactly the same. It's exactly the same.
So it is a 1-to-1 ratio of
it's exactly. So I probably,
well,
I don't know.
We can go up to 3. Yeah, there is some difference.
So I think, Gary, you might. What's the rules and regulations about supervision? Is it once again by state?
Yeah, look, the supervision really depends on the qualification and the risk of work that someone's doing. So if you're doing an electrical apprenticeship, supervision rules are going to be a lot tighter than if you're doing a business administration where you're not going to be able to hurt yourself. Again, the quality of training that you're doing off the job depends on supervision as well. So it really depends on the qualification and the type of work that you're doing. All of our data, Donna, that the word apprentice and traineeship don't really matter. It's the qualification that you're doing, and then the qualification has a set of responsibilities under that around supervision and wages and time on the job and off the job and those sorts of things.
Now that you brought up wages, let me ask, I mean, this is on a scale of the trainer, the trainee, or the apprentice. They come in, and is there a scale that they know if you hit this mark, you're going to go here, here, And are they employed by the group that is training them?
No, so they're
And-
employed by an employer or the GTO. So the GTO model is a form of employer, but all of our qualifications are linked to industrial awards, and under the awards, there's sets of pay, and then when you progress from a year 1 to a year 2 to a year 3, your pay changes and so on. So that's all determined outside of the apprenticeship system.
Okay, that's good.
So there's really
And-
only there's you don't have sponsors, and it's the employer of record, as Gary said, is either the employer, or there's this industry which has been around for 40 years, which is the group training model, who act as the employer. But one thing I would sort of note, Donna, is it's all about quality here. And very heavily regulated. So the GTOs have varying audits with all sorts of quality, consistently. Some would say maybe a little bit too regulated, but that's Australia. But that's a whole nother conversation, Jim. But yeah, so it really is very much the systems are focused on trying to get people to not just get the job or get the apprenticeship, but to keep the apprenticeship. And
Yes.
people who come from the US to Australia and come back after a study tour, and I say, what did you see, or what was the thing you took out of the apprenticeship system in Australia? And it's what the GTOs definitely offer, is that mentoring and support makes the difference. So with the group training organisations that Gary was talking about, these intermediaries, the completion rates head up towards 90%. But without stealing Andrew's thunder, if it's all right, maybe we'll get Andrew to talk a little bit about a program of the GTOs, which this might be a good segue, and then we could come back to a few questions at the end.
Thank you. Thank you.
No problem. And then Andrew will also talk about risk, and you'll see why. The clients, or the partnership that Andrew is going to talk about, I don't go and visit, because to visit them, you have to be prepared to be strapped into a simulation facility, into a simulated helicopter, that the lights then are turned out and then plunges upside down into a swimming pool, and you have to be able to get out. So our apprentices have to be fairly brave, because of course a lot of the work they're doing is on offshore oil platforms. But Andrew, I'll pass over to you.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, everybody. Let's share these slides on the screen. And I'm going to share now.
That's the Brisbane skyline, I think, if anyone's interested. So that's
in my background. That's the Story Bridge in Brisbane. That's right. You should be able to see those slides up on screen now. Bear with me coming back.
There's sort of a little black thing on the screen, Andrew. I'm not sure if that's just me, or is that everyone seeing that? Maybe you could
see it too.
Is it? All right, let's do it again. Let's have a look now. How's that looking?
Still there.
Oh, that's strange.
Yeah.
All right, let me just.
I think it's-
I've got so many options here we can share. Let's have a look at this one. How about that?
Yeah, maybe put that on big screen. Yeah, just share it down the bottom there.
There you go.
Little
yes.
change from PDF to PowerPoint. So as mentioned earlier, WPC Group is an apprentice intermediary, or a GTO, as it's called in Australia. So WPC's been around since 1981, one of the country's oldest apprentice intermediaries. Over that time has employed and successfully completed circa 20,000 apprentices, and hosted them to about 3,000 workplaces. And as Gary mentioned in the stats, nearly 95% of apprentices that complete will stay on into that vocation after they've finished. So it's a pretty good success rate. But what we're looking at today is a program that has been running for about 10 years now, and was about 18 months in the making. And that's a partnership with ExxonMobil, or Esso as they're called in Australia, the retail brand. So the background on ExxonMobil in Australia, they hadn't had an apprentice program since the 70s. Many, many years. They just looked at short-term labour, brought in international labour from overseas, but also they hadn't had an established program. So they came to us in about 2014. They sat down for about 6 or 12 months, and we had a good discussion about what they wanted to see in the apprenticeship program, what they didn't want to see, and it was unpacked. Some of the things they did years ago that didn't work, some of the industrial issues they were having in bringing apprentices on. So what we did, we sat down for a good 6 months and had a chat to them about what they wanted to see, and then from the ground up, we built this program as well. What I'm going to show you next. Now let's see if the video works. If it does, it's a miracle. What I'm going to show you next is a short video. So this was put together for an Australian Training Award. So this program a number of years ago won the best apprenticeship program in the country. So out of thousands of programs, it went through a judging panel. It was chosen as number one, and I can unpack some reasons as to why shortly. But I think rather than me talk, there's a 3-minute short video, which I'm going to show you on here. I'm just going to stop the share for a second. I'm going to reshare it and just add the sound in there. I've researched this. Doesn't mean it's going to work. That's it. Share it. Full screen it. And if I go to the next page, we should have a video to play. Yell out if you can't hear it, but here it is.
Esso has been working with WPC for a number of years to develop the latest batch of apprentices.
Esso engaged WPC in 2017 as we started to develop the apprentice and trainee program. We went out for expressions of interest for the program, and that entailed us going to schools, community groups, sporting clubs to really see who in the community was interested in starting an apprenticeship with Esso.
We have 19 apprentices, and they've all gone on to become valuable members of our team, and they directly contribute to providing 80% of energy to Victorian homes and businesses and 40% of Eastern Australia.
The apprenticeship program allows the experienced tradesmen to pass on their knowledge to the apprentices, not only at work, but also to build a relationship for things that may arise outside of work.
The thing I like most about the mentor program is having someone like Rod who I can look to if there's ever an issue, whether it be here on site or at trade school. Rod's always been there for me to help me through my studies and make me a better tradesman.
We currently have an outplacement program which utilises local community businesses like Rotafab, Marathon Electrical and Measurements Plus. This gives the apprentices opportunities to spend times in other workshops, giving them the experience that we can't provide on site to ensure they're a well-rounded tradesperson at the end of their time. As the apprentices have gone through their program, they've continued to maintain contact with the TAFE and the training providers, and also gone back to schools and talked to the schools about the experience and how much they've enjoyed the apprentice program.
How are you finding your apprenticeship at the moment?
Yeah, really good. I finished off my last assessment yesterday.
Tech 1 finished, yeah. Fantastic.
Once the apprentices in their 4th year reach Tech 1 competencies, they are allowed to work in the plant unassisted. This gives them much needed experience and job exposure to develop them into the best tradesperson they can possibly be. And it also creates efficiencies for the company. I've just enjoyed having the apprentices here on site. Just the energy and the enthusiasm that they've brought has been incredible. During the apprentice program, we've had 3 apprentices nominated for Apprentice of the Year. One of our electrical apprentices has even gone out on his own and obtained his contracting licence while he's still doing his instrumentation trade as a 5th year apprentice.
We're eager to continue a relationship with WPC to identify and develop local talent and set up our youth for success in the future.
I'm just so proud of what WPC and Esso have been able to do with this apprentice program, providing immense support to the community, providing a start to the careers of a number of young folk, and to provide a real business benefit to us here at Esso. What a great program it's been.
I'm really excited and proud that the apprenticeship program has been selected for these prestigious awards.
The ESOL Australia and WPC Apprenticeship and Training Program supports our ongoing supply of essential energy to Australia, while providing skilled employment opportunities for young Victorians. This valuable program is helping to develop a workforce that will be critical to securing our country's energy future.
So that summed it up in 3 minutes. And again, happy to take questions. I've got a couple more minutes to unpack this program and then can go through some questions about it. Here's some high-level stats. In the last 10 years, over 100 apprentices have gone through this program. So they're employed by us and hosted out to ExxonMobil or Esso, exactly into that plant you saw in the video there. The success rate of completions is at 98%. I mean, Gary can chime in there. That's unheard of over a longevity of 10 years. And again, for ExxonMobil, and particularly they report back into the US there, what happens is that's ROI, return on investment, and employers, honestly, that's all they look for. I've got a big investment here. What's a return on that? And over 100% have stayed on after their apprenticeship program. It's to do with here's some of the secret sauce to unpack it really quickly. One-to-one mentoring. They're assigned with a WPC mentor from day one. You saw Janine on the screen there. That was over COVID, so there's some non-face-to-face visits. And then they've supplied a one-to-one mentor on site. So a qualified technician that not just mentors them technically, but takes them through some life skills as well and looks for any early warning signs that are out there too. The other thing is sequencing of training. What they do is we talk to the local community college, and they don't tell us what they're going to train in. ExxonMobil and WPC say this is the skills required at the end of the apprenticeship, and we need to sequence it in this way in order to get the benefit out of the apprentice in their first year. So we talk to community college, or as we call it, TAFE, design that curriculum from the ground up so it's sequenced correctly. So they're productive in the first 3 months rather than waiting 12 months to be productive. And they do that. And the last one I want to build on, two things, is the induction process. I think Nick mentioned it, and so did Gary, in terms of that secret sauce. ExxonMobil are a bit different. They take them through an 8 to 16 week induction program. Now, it's not every day, but it's 1 to 2 days a week of high-level inductions there. They are working in a major hazardous facility, and they'll induct them on everything we can think of and then do follow-ups from out there. This is an organisation, ExxonMobil, that are investing in talent. They wanted to do it properly. They've spent a significant amount on setting up this structure. But 10 years on, the proof's there, just under 100% retention rate from out there, and winning this program a couple of years ago. Now what happens is everybody in that local community, this is a #1 apprenticeship in that part of the country. So come recruitment time in January, this is why we'll get 800 to 1,000 applications for a role from all around the place. People want to work with us in a successful program. I'm going to stop the share now.
So Andrew, just list some of the occupations, if you wouldn't mind. So there are some. There's something, in administration, in the office.
It started, right, Nick, it started in traditional trades. It started in the two. It started in maintenance fitting and turning, or engineering. It started in electrical, and they call it electro instrumentation. So it's a dual 5-year trade in that area. Then into shift supervisors who worked on a lot of these rigs out there too. So they trained them up there, production trainees. And then they even delved into information technology. So working in the head office in IT, and also business administration. So these white-collar traineeships that Gary spoke about came after about year 4 or 5. So now there's about 7 different occupations that are offered at ExxonMobil out there too. And that's just unpacking in a 5-minute discussion a successful program, what it looks like if the employer partner invests in that and takes time to set it up properly.
Got a question. This is Jim Rosabeth. Did I understand correctly that the classroom instruction is provided by the community college?
Yes, it is. Yes. Yeah, it's outsourced to the community college. They hold the qualification and the certificate, and they're able to deliver that. Exactly. Yep.
How is that funded? Who pays for it?
Gary, jump in here. But certainly it's federally. It comes from federal funding sometimes down to the states, and then the states will control those community colleges and the funding they get from out there. In the end, an apprentice would normally pay about, I think, 20% of what the normal school fees would be, and there's around about 80% the government would subsidize.
And they want to do that, not because they don't have the money, Jim, because they feel that that the apprentices, if they're paying something, it's going to drive some of that retention. They feel that they're actually contributing towards it. So I know there's been periods, where people say free community college or free this, but yeah, so it's heavily subsidised.
Mm-hmm.
But once again, it's also subsidised by occupation. So there's national skill shortage lists. So if you want to undertake an apprenticeship in Tuscan pot making, I don't think that'll be very heavily subsidised. But energy, clean energy, Australia is becoming a large. When I said we don't manufacture anything, we are actually manufacturing a lot of military. We're very military driven now with the US. So we make submarines. This time around, we're trying to get ones that are actually a bit quieter. The last ones you could hear from China, they weren't so successful, the Collins submarines. But so we're making submarines, we make fighter jets. So a lot of British aerospace, all the large manufacturers are here. So, but clean energy is probably one of the fastest growing areas in Australia. But there's still a lot of building and construction. Yeah.
But could I come back to how the money flows, or is that something you're going to talk about, Nick?
No, talk about the money, and we've got Gary, and I'm really just here to tie it all together and translate for these two guys. But I think it's pretty well.
Presentations. I would like a little overview of how the money flows.
Can I ask a question though regarding, right before we get to that, back to what Jim was saying? This is Donna again. So you're saying that the community college is providing not on the job, but the other training. It's federally funded, but apprenticeship contributes to it. Are they doing that while they're being paid in an apprenticeship so that some of their salary is going to their own training to help them better on the job? Explain that.
Yeah, look, Donna, in a nutshell, over that 4-year commitment, they're paid full time, whether they're at work or they're doing RTI, the related training instruction. If they go off the job or if they're trained on the job, they're still being paid the same rate of pay over that particular time. In the end, the apprentice won't pay anything themselves for schooling. It'll either be subsidised for a government for a portion, and any shortfall the employer would pick up. That's generally how it's done from out there. Throughout that whole time of training, the apprentice would normally do around about 300 hours of training per year. They might do, or 40 days of training, which is paid the same as they're paid if they go to work. Yeah.
Gary mentioned before, Donna, that they're same as the US. There's a lot of private training providers, popped up 10, 15 years ago. And one of the benefits or the selling points to do an apprenticeship is that you earn and learn, and you don't come out with huge student debt. But there was private training providers popping up, charging, students would watch a video on how to cook food, but not actually cook the food. And they were paying $40,000, $50,000 a year. So the government really tightly regulates. But I'd have to say, if there was one difference between the US and Australian systems, that the Australian Community College, or TAFEs, deliver a lot more training. I don't know what percentage it would be, Gary. What do you think it would be, just as a guess? Like the majority, it's fair to say the majority of training of apprenticeships?
In the apprenticeship space, they're the biggest provider because they're the more expensive courses to deliver when you deliver them properly.
So definitely the more traditional trades. It's when it gets into the traineeships that sometimes you get private providers who might, train in some of the IT or cybersecurity or in that regard. But Donna, too, while Gary's got the floor or the screen, maybe he might dive into just a little bit of unpacking that financial thing to Jim's question.
Yeah.
I do have a couple of slides on it that I can share with you.
Perfect.
Right.
That I've just pulled up because I've got a different presentation to do later today on funding. Let me just share that for you. You should be able to see that screen there. So the funding, as Nick mentioned, the training component is funded by government. The employment aspect and the wages is funded by employers.
Sure.
We have an agreement between the federal government and the states, so it's a joint agreement. It's, as I mentioned before, it's the first time in about 10 years that they've actually signed an agreement. The total funding, when we look at this, it's fairly significant for Australian budgets. It's about $12 billion over 5 years. And this, the federal government will set their priorities. So they'll say that we want to improve gender equality. They want to improve our Indigenous young people and culturally diverse young people, give them more opportunities. They've got priorities at the moment for getting to net zero, so clean economy, essential care, healthcare services, developing our sovereign capability, so getting into food security and manufacturing, and improving our digital and technology capabilities. So the government have set their priorities on what they want to fund, and then they'll say to the states, we'll give you money for these priorities, and then you have to go out and try and get training providers to set their priorities to what the federal government want to spend their money on. So you'll get more money if you've got an Indigenous young person or a long-term unemployed young person. If you put them into an apprenticeship, the government will fund that at a better level. Obviously, some qualifications are better funded than others. As Nick mentioned before, we've got a strong priority. You'll see a lot of advertising in Australia at the moment for free TAFE. So there's a lot of programs where the government will say to a young person, if you go and do your training through a TAFE, it'll be free. But we want to get more of these people into apprenticeships, not just necessarily sending them to school to do another study without an employer. From an apprenticeship perspective, there are some small incentives that governments will give employers to take on an apprentice. It normally equates to 5 to 10% of their wages over the life of the, it wouldn't even be that. It'd be less than 5%, I should say, of their wages would be subsidised by governments to help encourage employers to take on a young person, because they know that there's supervision costs and there's all these other costs that employers are bearing to take on a young person through an apprenticeship. Jim, I'm happy to share these slides with you, so we'll make sure that we send them through to you.
Yeah,
the second one that I've got there probably just explains that a little bit better on the second slide. So it's state and federally funded. It's contestable. So a training organisation needs to apply to the state government to say, we think we can fill this number of places each year. The government sets their priorities. The government sets the value of what they're willing to pay for. They normally pay at a very prescriptive level. So there might be 30 units of competency. Each unit of competency might be made up of 30 hours or 40 hours. The government will say, we'll pay you $12.50 for every unit of competency you deliver per hour, and then we'll only pay you if the students complete. So this is where Nick was talking before. We've got a lot of regulations sitting behind this, and there's a lot of paperwork, and there's a lot of compliance to make sure that the money's flowing correctly, that organisations are paid correctly, and they're only being paid if people are getting successful completions. So again, this is one of the things that we think apprenticeships can work a lot better. Instead of just students churning through more courses and they're not linked with employers, governments want to fund less of that going forward, and they want to make sure they're getting better value for their money in the future. I might stop it there.
Take a break. I have a question related to that. I thought you mentioned earlier, or somebody did, about apprentices paying part of the classroom instruction cost, but that was not on this screen. I'm confused.
Yeah, no. So apprentices themselves don't have to pay. The employer will pay their costs for training.
I think of it like a gap, Jim. It's like a medical gap, that the only one who doesn't pay is the employer. So the government will subsidise the training, which encourages employers to take on apprentices. But if there is a gap, the apprentices would be, if they had to pay, they would be reimbursed for them. Is that right? Someone, yeah.
That's exactly right. Yep. The apprentice will not pay for the training. Yep.
How do they get reimbursed?
Yeah, I don't understand. By whom?
So what will happen is if you're an apprentice signing up today, the government will subsidise about 80% of that training cost. If there's a shortfall, either the employer pays it directly.
So Donna, there's the government has outsourced to providers, people who run. They change their names regularly. Gentlemen, what's it called at the minute? The NACS Acts. What are they called now?
Yeah, it is.
What are they called this week? They're
ACAP.
Yep. What? ACAP.
ACAPs. Yeah.
Oh my, help us all.
Apprentice career. Yeah, don't worry. Yeah.
No, apprentice career. What? Placement. I bet you. Anyway, the government has outsourced the administration of the operations of the apprenticeship. So the administration, the government's administration side. So that's outsourced. So they would handle reimbursements and things like that. So they do the paperwork, the signing up of the apprentices. They manage all the administration for the employers, or the group training companies that Gary talked about. They're considered to be employers. We are employers just as another employer. So employers. So if you were signing up an apprentice starting, there'd be an interaction not just between you and the apprentice, but the government's representative, which is these. I've already forgotten, Gary. It's so long, that acronym. But anyway, the apprenticeship centres.
I'm sorry, I'm confused, and this is where your translation, these two English languages, we need your help, Nick. So what I think Donna and I are trying to get to is, bottom line, in the United States, students pay community college tuition. Community colleges are also subsidized by state and local government, but the marginal cost, the tuition for this student for this course, is paid for by the student. They can get financial aid of various kinds. The question that I'm trying to understand is, if I'm an apprentice and I'm taking the classroom instruction at a community college, net, will I have to pay for it at the end of the day or not? That's what I'm unclear about still.
Jim, I might just jump in there. So if it's a student relationship, we've got the same setup as you in the US. The student would pay themselves, whereas if they do it as an apprenticeship and they've got an employment arrangement, the employer would pay.
The employer would pay and the employer would be reimbursed by the government?
No, not necessarily. The government will get the employer will get some incentives from the government to take on more apprentices, but it doesn't cover the full tuition costs.
Okay, but and that's for across trainee positions and apprenticeship positions, or it varies by occupation?
It varies a little bit, but the underlying model is the same. The training, as Andrew mentioned before, the training costs of about 80% would be covered by government, but the shortfall would be picked up by the employer.
Okay, not the apprentice.
Correct. In the apprentice model, the apprentice doesn't have to pay for anything. They also get all their safety gear and everything else.
I understand. Okay, thank you.
I think we've got a couple of hands up there, Catherine.
Yep, Avanette, go ahead.
Hello, my question is similar to Senator Roosevelt. So in that example that you just used, would the apprentice need to pay the tuition, the 20% per se tuition, and then get reimbursed by the employer, or does the employer actually pay outright and the apprentice doesn't have to come out of pocket for it?
Yeah, no, some of the employers will make the apprentice pay that 20% up front to give them a little bit of skin in the game. And then if they successfully complete each year, the employer would reimburse them as they go through the apprenticeship. So it's giving them a bit of incentive to hang in there. Yeah.
Okay.
It's like a forgivable loan.
Correct.
Yep. In some cases.
Actually, a repayable one.
Yeah, repayable loan. You're right, a repayable loan. Yeah, not sure. But it's contingent on success. I mean, that's the argument that the proponents of that would use.
Yeah. What percentage of employers do that, do you think?
It's probably 80 to 85% would do it. Employers get sick of young people starting something and not finishing. So they're getting more and more, I guess, frugal with their funds. They want to make sure that they're getting the right young person.
That's where that's like
motivation.
that's a disadvantage to hiring young people. Some employers prefer, the maturity which comes, with older apprentices. Some employers are a little bit hesitant because of that. The sort of the phenomenon. I mean, you could talk about, changing generation. So there's some very interesting social demographers here. There's a gentleman called Mark McCrindle, who does a lot of interesting work that you could look that up. Is that his company name? It's called Mark McCrindle Research, I think.
Yeah, McCrindle, yep.
Yeah, McCrindle Research, and they do a lot of work in and around changing generations, and vocational education and training. Yeah.
One of the more interesting things was when you talked about the mentoring. And this has been something that we talk about a lot. And it's like it's one-to-one mentoring from day one, but not just on skills. And that was the important thing. Is you said, they look for early warning signs. And that is some of the things that happens when they're in apprenticeships and, their car breaks down and they can't get there, or et cetera. That whole life type of thing is really important to your success, I think.
You're spot on. That's the real benefit of the GTO network and our members. They've got those field officers, they've got that level of experience and knowledge, and early warning signs. The quicker you can get on top of some of these issues, the better chance you've got of success.
Yeah.
Mental health issues.
Yeah, I apologize for not being on camera, but I'm driving. And I shouldn't even do this, but at least I can talk and still look at the road. I don't want to see myself and keep looking.
Wonderful. So the session was being recorded. So, and afterwards, if there's anything that, particularly anybody wanted to focus further in on, just reach out to myself or Gary or Andrew, or we can, through Catherine, we can send further links. One thing Australia is not short of is reports on apprenticeship. Reports on apprenticeship reform, change, ideas about change, when governments change. But it is, probably as we're getting to the end of our session, one thing I have talked with you about in the past, Jim, is that apprenticeships, it's never a political issue. Some governments fund more than others, but it's certainly seen as, a key part of Australia's training system. And the government in these reports is always looking for ways to reduce the red tape for employers. And so quite often have reviews and try and unpack what could be done better. Some people have said in the past that it is quite complex navigating your way as an employer through all these acronyms, and that's where particularly with the group training companies or the intermediary employer of record companies, they take on all that administration for employers. But the other thing is to say, being Australian, I am based in California. I may as well, from where you all are, I may as well be in Australia. It's like right across the other side of the country. But I do get out east from time to time. So happy to, connect with you all. And Gary and Andrew both travel. Strangely enough, I live in the US, but I'm in Australia, and Andrew lives in Australia, but I think he's in Florida or somewhere. But that's how the world goes. and I'm not sure where Gary is, but really
Get out of
appreciate
Florida.
Yeah. He's enjoying the good weather. He's enjoying the good weather put on by the Floridians. Apparently it's been fantastic. But thank you again, Catherine, and Jim and everybody else who joined. We really appreciated the opportunity. We are passionate about apprenticeship. You're definitely on the right path.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time and participation today. And a special thanks to our presenters for sharing their insights on apprenticeships in Australia. Thank you so much. Gary, if you could actually share any PowerPoint slides, that would be amazing, so we can make those available to the commission members who were unable to attend. That would be great. You can either share them with Sarah. I think she was the original contact. I'm not sure if I'm on that email. But if you share it with Sarah, we'll get it around. But with that,
Terrific.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Donna. Thanks. That was
Thanks,
nice meeting
everybody.
Bye.